And we're live. Well, welcome back to the Bell's Cup podcast. I'm your host, David Bell. And in today's episode, we'll be taking a look at round 9 of the 2025 Formula 1 World Championship, with this week's Grand Prix being held at the Circuit de Barcelona-Catalunya in Spain. Now, let's get ready for those 5 green lights, and we'll be underway. So, before we move on to first and second free practice, we're going to take a look at some of the stories, or frankly, some of the regulation changes that we saw during this weekend. So the main regulation change was with the front wing in terms of how much flex it can have. So at each end of the wing is now only allowed 10 millimeters of flex when 100 kilos is applied, which before it was 15 millimeters of flex. Then for the upper sections, say the section of the wing that's say closer to the driver, if you will, can only now have 3 millimeters of flex when 6 kilograms is applied, which before it was 5 millimeters of flex. Then we actually saw a bit of a change to the underfloor skid blocks as well. In terms of, they weren't changed in a way in terms of like the positioning or the size and shape of them, but it was changed in terms of the material that they're made out of. Well, at least one driver each team had that changed. So the material was traditionally made out of titanium, but now it's like a steel alloy. Now some teams are doing some tests on the actual material itself for future races. Now what those tests or why they were doing those tests weren't really kind of specified, or they weren't told to us at all. But just from my kind of guess, if you will, was frankly probably to allow or manage the amount of sparks that come off the bottom of the cars to avoid grasses catching fire like we saw in Japan. Now, moving on to first practice. So at the start of the practice, we actually saw a few new faces on the track, with Williams subbing in Victor Martins in place of Alex Albon. Then we saw over at Haas, Ryo Hirakawa was actually in place of Alex Albon. Now, it's shit to have drivers, take time out of the car, so they obviously won't understand or get a feel for how the car works on that specific track, or have much time in the car versus their teammate or, frankly, other drivers on the track. But it's also beautiful to see teams actually giving younger drivers or newer drivers opportunities to drive the newest versions of Formula 1 cars. If they're even F2 drivers, F3 drivers, just gives them an idea of, is this really what you want? Are you going to be able to step up to the plate? Are you going to be able to perform at the higher level in actual Formula 1 itself? Then it was so good to see the 2 Ferraris near the top of the timing charts, but we actually didn't get any info on the run plans, if they were more focused on longer runs with higher fuel loads, if they were kind of focused on shorter stints, 5, 6, 7 laps, or if they were just going for straight race pace that's like needed for Saturdays. But the session itself, you'll probably get a feel of this if you actually watch the race or listen to the episode later on or throughout this episode. That the weekend, it was just a standard race weekend. Nothing really happened. It was just a boring session. But at the end of the first practice session, at least, we did see the 3 fastest drivers being Lando in P1, Verstappen in P2, then Hamilton in P3. Then, looking at the second practice session, Ollie Behrman actually had quite a scary spin at turn 3, which his car actually spun 360 degrees. By the looks of it, he put a wheel on the red painted section of the track, the section between the asphalt and the kind of curb and then the runoff area. But luckily, it just looked like he just lost traction, and he spun off into the gravel trap, which slowed his car right down before hitting the wall or hitting the barrier. And his car was just undamaged, and he was able to drive it back to the pits, then continue on with that session. Then, following on from the first practice session, these are frankly not what really the spectators are there to watch. That's why, if anything, the race weekend Friday is always kind of the chittest. and there's not really many spectators on track, because those are not really the most fun days, so nothing really happened. But our top 3 drivers from the second session were Piastri in P1, Russell in P2, then Verstappen in P3. Then we'll look at the final practice session now. So well, the first 30 minutes of the session was, again, same as FP2 and FP1. It was just quite shit. There was only like 4 or 5 cars actually out on track at the time. Now, as I literally just said before, I know it's not the most exciting parts of the weekend. Those would be the qualifying and the actual race itself. But how boring must it be for being a spectator at the actual track itself? Especially when they're paying thousands to attend the whole weekend, just to have one of the sessions basically be void of cars. I mean, it just seems strange that the fact that even the teams, considering teams, pumping so much money into their drivers, into their cars, into their teams to attend the races, then they miss the first 30 minutes of the session. It just doesn't make sense. Just strange. But within the last 15 minutes of the session, when, there were actually cars out on track, actually driving about, we actually seen Lando Norris run wide on the entrance of turn 9. And from the onboard cameras, we actually seen the car kind of bounce along the track or bottom out, or you could even say it was porpoising, while basically he kind of lost traction of the car, which it caused him to run wide a little bit, or wider than expected. Then, after the final session, we saw our top 3 fastest drivers, with Piastri in P1, Norris in P2, then Leclerc again, or well, not again, but instead of Hamilton this time, it was Leclerc in P3. But now, moving on to the more interesting parts of the weekend, actual qualifying. But again, the one exception to that was Q1. With around 10-ish minutes left of the session, again, there was no cars out on track. I mean, again, it's just so frustrating to even be like a spectator, and even if we're just watching the race and there's no cars out on track, like how can that be fun to watch? I mean, frankly, all that we're doing is just kind of listen to the commentators, kind of just talk shit and talk about new regulations, spectate on drivers, where they're going to finish in the race, any drama that's happened in the race. But we want to see cars out on track. If cars aren't coming out for the first half, especially for a qualifying session as well, it's just annoying. It's just frustrating. But again, I'm not a driver. I'm not a team principal. I'm not a mechanic. I'm sure there was reasons behind it that us, the general populace, the spectators, aren't privy to. But again, it's probably nothing that's going to change anytime soon. We just kind of have to suck it up and get used to it. During the first qualifying session, we did see a little bit of drama with Carlo Pinto having to pull over at the edge of the pit straight, which looked like or sounded like his car had mechanical problems. And because of that, he was unfortunately put out straight away in Q1. Then I think some eyes or some talks are really going to have to be had for that second Red Bull seat. Because as we saw during the first practice session, Yuki Tsunoda was actually put out, or he finished in the last place. So it's like, what the fuck is happening with that second Red Bull seat? Is it cursed? Is it just have bad mojo? It's defeated 6 drivers over the last 4 years. And especially when you've got, a 4-time world champion as your teammate, could really all 6 drivers can't perform in that seat. But it goes without saying, it's probably the worst seat in motorsport. And if Yuki does end up getting dropped at the end of the season, which I hope he doesn't, but if he does, would Isaac want to take his place? Is like, would he want to take the place, knowing what happened to the past drivers? Like, if he could handle that Red Bull, or would Red Bull have to hire a more seasoned second driver like they did with Perez? Because he probably had the best stint out of the teammates that Verstappen has had over the years, other than Ricciardo, but he was teammates with Verstappen before he was a world champion. He was still a rookie at the time. He was still new to the sport. But I think it's something that Red Bull seriously need to consider in the next couple of years. especially, well, maybe not right now, possibly when the new regulations come in for 2026, that'll all change, and Yuki will fucking be beating Verstappen. He'll be topping the time charts, but it's just time will tell. Then, at the end of the first qualifying session, we lost 5 drivers, those being Hulkenberg, Ocon, Sainz, Carlo Pinto, and again, Yuki Tsunoda. I tell you, this episode's probably just going to be a big fucking ranting session. But in the latter half of the second qualifying session, we saw, or should I say we didn't see, the top 5 drivers even really take part in the session. Where, I mean, yes, it's shit to watch as a spectator, again, as I've said a million times before. But in this situation, in terms of like qualifying, it's understandable why they don't really want to take part, because they obviously don't want to wear down their tires unnecessarily or run the risks of crashing the cars and then being put out in Q2 and dropping back to the fucking middle of the pack. But again, it just makes the sport boring to watch. Then, at the end of the session, we did lose another 5 drivers, or the final 5 drivers, being Albon, Bortoleto, Lawson, Stroll, and Berman. Then, for the final qualifying session, or Q3, we actually saw a bit of a mixed bag of teams making it into Q3, and it wasn't just the top teams kind of dominating all the top 10 spaces, or just dominating the track, or dominating the weekend from the word go. You know, we saw an Aston make it up, we saw an Alpine, a Racing Bull make it up into Q3. So it's good to see that the lower teams, or the teams that are kind of further back on the grid, are actually able to kind of push hard and push the actual top teams to evolve the racing strategies, evolve their cars, because they have a lot more staff on their payroll doesn't necessarily mean they're going to win. And I know it's only round 9 of 24, but it's starting to shape up like a championship winning season for Oscar, with a time of 1 minute 11.546. He's taken yet another pole position for the race on Sunday. Now, even if you've watched the race, you kind of know what happened on Sunday. But he's much. All the McLaren fans are probably gonna hate me for saying this, or even say like the Lando Norris fans. But even though he's been in the sport less, it's like 80 races or something less than Norris, he's a better driver than Norris. That's probably without question. I mean, he's been leading the championship for 5-6 races now. But again, even on the qualifying front on the Saturday, it was followed by his teammate Norris in P2, then Verstappen in P3. Then in between Saturday and Sunday, or before the race started, we were actually informed that Lance Stroll wouldn't actually be taking part in the race itself, due to him apparently suffering some pain in his hand and his wrist. Now, if that is off the back of what happened to him last year, or the start of last season, when there was a big cycling accident where he did break his hand and had to get surgery and stuff to it, but he'll actually have to undergo a procedure to address the issues suffered this weekend. Now, with Alex Albon and Williams, they just weren't having the best weekend or best race this week. After having 2 of his front wings broken and receiving a 10-second time penalty, he actually had to retire his car from the race. Now, if he didn't serve his 10-second penalty, that would have been kind of brought forward or carried over to the following race in Canada. So we even kind of see him in the latter half of the race, him serving the 10-second penalty, and then doing 1 lap around the circuit with a broken wing, and just pulling straight into the pits again to retire. Then again, if you've seen some of the memes kind of floating about where how kind of boring this weekend kind of was, we saw for the first half of the race, again, there wasn't really much action going on other than Lawson's contact with Albon, which again forced him or caused him to retire his car. But he also then almost wiped out Ollie Berman for a very late dive to attempt an overtake at the end of the pit straight into turn 1. But now, on around lap 55 is where things really start to get interesting, or where things kind of kicked off. So it started off with a double yellow wave flag that was then later upgraded to a full safety car, as Kimi Antonelli's car just lost power. It just straight up just died on him when he was at turn 10. And if you watched it from the onboard cameras or the kind of the broadcast cameras, you just heard his engine just shut off, just completely just die on him. And we also saw smoke billowing out from the exhaust or from the rear of the car. And because of that, you seen him jump out, and it unfortunately ended his race then and there. But the big drama from the race, or was actually at the end of the race, between Russell and Max. So it did look like Max intentionally turned into Russell and collided with Russell, which we know kind of what happened a few years ago when Hamilton and not Verstappen, what's his name? Vettel, Sebastian Vettel. When Hamilton, when Vettel thought Hamilton brake checked him, he pulled alongside him and just turned into him. We know what happened there. But in this time, Russell after not giving the place back when he overtook him off the track, and he actually gains an advantage. Now that was going to be looked at after the race, or it was looked at after the race, and Max unfortunately, literally fucking turned into him. It should have been a black flag, but he was found at fault, and he was actually given a 10-second time penalty, which dropped him from, I think it was what was he? P5, P6, but with that penalty, it dropped him down to P10. So he lost his team a decent amount of points doing that. But it also gave him 3 penalty points on his super license, which his total amount now is 11, which is 1 away from the threshold of an automatic 1 race ban, like an automatic ban. Then with the last driver we saw to actually get banned from accumulating too many penalty points was back in 2024, Jesus, with Kevin Magnussen. Accumulated too many points and was banned because of it. But with that, the Spanish Grand Prix comes to an end. Now, with this, it marks his 7th career win in Formula 1. So an Oscar Piastri wins in Spain. And followed by Norris in P2. Then after the overtake that Leclerc did in the closing laps to Verstappen, it was Leclerc in P3. And with that win, Oscar actually extends his lead over the Drivers' Championship by 10 points. And that will do us for this week's episode of the Bells Cup podcast. I want to thank you for listening to this week's episode. And if you feel like you've enjoyed, feel free to follow us here on wherever you get your podcasts. And I look forward to talking to you all, I would say next week, but it'll be in the following week for round 10 or the Canadian Grand Prix. Bye, everybody.